Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers. Yeah. Thanks. And, well, Star Wars 3D hits a major continuity issue in only its second issue this time around. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler. You may recall, in our last episode, we took a look at Star Wars 3D #1 from Blackthorne Publishing. It's an unusual series in that it's being released between the end of Marvel's tenure with Star Wars and the beginning of Dark Horse's. The first issue was in December of 1987. We then see two more releases in 1988, which are usually referred to as Star Wars 3D numbers 2 and 3. But again, bear in mind that all of these are part of a broader, just Blackthorne 3D series. Issue number 1 was actually Blackthorne 3D number 30. This one is Star Wars 3D number 2, entitled Havoc on Hoth. This is, if you look at the inside information here, down at the bottom, is Blackthorne 3D series number 47 from summer of 1988. Now, you may look at that cover and say, looks kind of familiar. Where have I seen that before? Well, if you've read Star Wars 3D, you've seen that image before in Anaglyph 3D in issue number 1. They went to Mos Eisley Cantina to go find Throg, who eventually Luke gives the Lars Moisture Farm deed to. And when they enter, there they are, pulling off their hoods. That's the cover of issue number 2. They just reused their own art from issue number 1. At least number 1 used a different brawl here than what we wound up seeing in the back of the issue when they got into the brawl inside. At least it's a little bit different here. Sort of staged differently. They just lifted a panel and said, here, it's going to be the cover. I don't know what to think about that, really. Kind of seems lazy to me. Once again, as in the previous issue, it is Len Wein doing the writing, but we have a man by the name of Patrick Zurcher doing the artwork. And the artwork, actually not too bad in this one, especially with the Millennium Falcon. Looks pretty realistic relative to the models, of course, used for the films. Pretty decent Vader with his meditation chamber. That's Admiral Quist down there at the bottom. Decent Han Solo, decent Luke, C-3PO. Certainly much better in their first issues, their only 3 issues, than Marvel was at the beginning, where most of their characters look nothing like their film counterparts. Or at the end of the Marvel one, where Luke wound up looking like freaking Fabio with a huge BFG. That's a big freaking gun. This issue causes some problems. The first issue seemed like it was very shortly after the events of A New Hope. Now, they hadn't set necessarily a date for when the evacuation of Yavin takes place in the overall continuity, at least not as of 1988 when this is being written. So it makes it seem as though they've just come straight from Tatooine, and now they're going back to Yavin base for the first time since then. We have to kind of assume instead that maybe there's been some other missions in between, and Han and Luke are still just kind of bickering a little bit about what happened on Tatooine. Suffice to say, when they arrive at Yavin 4, there are Imperials in orbit. This can't possibly be a good thing. They wind up sneaking past them, reaching the base by going through an asteroid field, where it's kind of cool that we have Admiral Quist is told to capture the Millennium Falcon. He comes and reports that they've lost it in the asteroid field. They think it's been destroyed. Vader says that'll be all, and when he tries to walk away, Vader chokes him to death with the Force. He says the kind of cheesy line, "When I said that would be all, Admiral, I meant it." Kind of like the dead Admiral there, with kind of like, looks almost like there's like goop coming out of his mouth, like saliva, like, oh, I'm dead. But suffice to say, they find the Rebel base is empty, and they've evacuated. Now that's an issue by itself, because in the mainstream continuity, they're with the Rebels as they evacuate. Here, we've basically got the evacuation, then they just stumble upon the fact it's already happened, and they go to the rendezvous coordinates that Luke had memorized. They do rendezvous back with the fleet, and now they need a new place as a base. So, Leia calls upon Han, because, hey, he's a smuggler. Her phrase is, we have to find a new base of operations, someplace isolated, someplace safe, and I figure an old spice smuggler must know dozens of such places. Any suggestions, Solo? And what does Han come up with? Your wish is my command, your princess ship. You ever heard of a snowball called Hoth? That's right, we are rewriting previous continuity, and Ice World from the newspaper strips is apparently, at least for the purposes of this, tossed out the window, and this is a new tale of how the Alliance finds Hoth and turns it into their new base. We'll get into that more in a moment. Suffice to say, they land on Hoth, they do some checking around, we see how Luke manages to tame a Tauntaun for the first time, at least the first time in this issue, only for them to wind up finding that, yeah, Hoth is a great place for smugglers' bases. You know how you know? Because there's a bunch of freaking smugglers already there. They run into smugglers led by Salmac, the Mon Calamari, or whatever Lucas is calling their species this week, and they basically duke it out until the Selmac and his men are trying to capture Han for the bounty, and they wind up bringing down the cave base, the ice, onto the smugglers. But they still need to search around, so they are staying on Hoth for a little bit just to find out whether or not it could actually be suitable as a base. So, we've got a story here that is purposely contradicting previously existing continuity. It's not like there was a whole lot out there at the time, but this again goes to emphasize this idea that until 1991, there is no official continuity. There is no sense that different publishing lines are meant to link together in Star Wars at this point. It just isn't a concept that was being considered really in any meaningful way at the time. So, we wind up at the story that is considered apocryphal. It doesn't really fit within the overall continuity here. Generally speaking, I try to include stuff on my Star Wars Timeline Gold, right? Check out the link at the bottom, in as inclusive a way as possible, because that tends to be what Lucasfilm tries to do. They try to include everything unless it absolutely has to be removed. And what I've basically assumed with this is that maybe it's a rumor. Maybe it's one of those stories that people tell about the evacuation or tell about how they found Hoth, but it's not actually true. Either way, it doesn't fit or jive with what is already out there in the continuity and what was published since. This, of all the evacuation stories and finding Hoth stories, seems to be the one that is chucked out the window. That being said, this story, Havoc on Hoth, is it an essential read? No, of course not. It would like to be, because it's going in and it's trying to tell us this is how they evacuated. This is how they found Hoth. Only, this isn't the version that winds up being considered true anyway. So, unfortunately, this issue is not an essential read, nor is it really a read that you should probably read if you are new to Star Wars, because it's probably just going to wind up confusing you. But an interesting little thing to check out, because it is Star Wars in 3D, anaglyph, red and blue glasses, 3 dimensions. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.